Piaget said intelligence is what you use when you don't know what to do. So what are these children doing who suddenly can't get the answer when they're so used to being quickly able to get the answer? My name's Ian Gilbert, and I set up a company called Independent Thinking 26 and a half years ago. Where are we now? November 2020. And it was a company that I set up primarily to work with young people around thinking and learning and motivation and memory and creativity and learning skills. And I was a French teacher when I set it up, but I went into French teaching as a way of just getting closer to young people to do all the work around thinking skills. That was my motivation, if you like, for being a French teacher. And I had a French degree, so I needed to do something with it. And even in my NQT year, my newly qualified teacher year, I was running all these extracurricular classes around thinking and learning and memory and all of those sorts of things. And then I met, there was a colleague in the staff room who liked the ideas, and she was sort of helping me run some of these things. We did thinking skills holidays and we did all sorts of things. And then one day it turned out her husband had sold his engineering business and they were looking to invest. And they said, we like your ideas, we'd like to help you set up as a company, and we're prepared to loan you £20,000 and take a share in the company and sort of see you starting off. But I never intended to be entrepreneurial. I've never thought about setting up a business, but that was the framework by which they could lend me the money, if you like. So, that was the starting point in 1994, all those years ago. Originally it was just me going into schools, working with young people, a lot of work. I used to do a thing called a Blueprint for Success, sort of motivational taster workshop with sixth formers for like 50 quid, all your money back, and just sort of getting me into schools. And then I did a mail shot which I sent out to ATL, the teachers union, and they printed it verbatim, maybe because ITL and ATL were similar, I don't know. And then a local school saw that and they got me in to do INSET. I never meant to do INSET, I never wanted to, that was far too scary. But you say yes to everything, and then it sort of just grows from there, really. So, and I tried employing people for a little while, but that was just too messy because you end with all their problems. I had nothing. So, what ITL has organically grown into now, currently, is this platform where we don't employ anybody, but we have associates who are just great practitioners in various aspects of education. Many of them are teachers, either practicing or have been, or practicing school leaders or have been, although we've also got people who haven't had a teaching background but work with young people. They might have an acting background or a business training background. One of our leading associates is a consultant paediatric neurologist. So we're just bringing together as many interesting voices as possible and giving them a platform through speaking, through INSET, through the conferences we run or the keynotes we're asked to do, and increasingly in the last few years through our books, through the Independent Thinking Press books as well. So giving them a platform to put forward their view of education and the view of education that unites us. We're united by our values, I suppose. Independent thinking is what it is. We're not a system. Nobody tells anybody what to think, but we're saying here are the values that we believe run through a good education, the way education should be. And it's putting the child at the centre. It's putting the adult close to the child at the centre. It's treating it as humans. It's putting the phrase we use. You use your data to improve your children, not the other way around. We're very much at odds to the current model of direct transmission pedagogy of, everybody's the same. You deliver the information to them or kick them out if they don't behave. We're totally at odds to that. Which is nice. We're for a while we were sort of coming centre stream, and then with the current regime, when Gove arrived and sort of threw everything out that was half decent, we found ourselves on the edges again, which is much better. You get a lot more done around the edges.
It's a constant full circle, isn't it? It's I remember doing this, 10 years ago, and
But if you focus in on the people and the brain and the emotions, and I was reading a book about Gaudi, the Spanish architect, and he used to talk about original being as in back to origin. And I'm thinking, how does that apply to education? And it's going back to what makes us human, what makes us people, what makes young children learn, what makes adults and children interact together in a way that's formative and productive. And if you hang on to all of those things and all the trends that come and go, they can come and go, and that's okay. It's the fashions come and go, everything moves on, that's okay. But you stick to origins, you stick to what's original. And that's the people and the connections and the emotions and the heart and the brain right at the centre of it all. So that's what we try to do.
Well, that's a lovely key message there, just talking about how we're keeping the core real and keeping it, preserving it, because it is very easy to get caught up with all the changes and things that happen, all the fluff around everything. So I want to ask you, you've said that your company is based on independent thinking. In layman's terms, what do you mean by independent thinking?
It is literally to actually come up with your own opinion, to come up with your own thoughts, to be creative, to make new connections, to think deeply, reflectively, philosophically, not just to take stuff at face value. A lot of the work that I was doing right from the early years was around philosophy for children, and there's a line in P4C, which is I thoroughly recommend philosophy for children to any teacher out there and parents. And there's a line from Socrates: an unexamined life is a life not worth living. And it's saying, let's stop skimming the surface. Let's just burrow down a little bit deeper. Let's reflect. Let's take time to take the information that's there and put it through our own system and our own thinking, and come up with new thoughts and different thoughts and new connections. And connections is right at the heart of creativity. And I mean, I've taught creative thinking to all sorts of people over the years, from not only in education, but I've taught it to tax inspectors, I've taught it to prisoners in a maximum security prison. And there are so many techniques for helping people be creative. It's easy to be creative. And I was thinking, what stops most people from being creative? And I realized there's a word that we need to get to right at the beginning, which is also at the heart of independent thinking, which is refusal. I refuse to do it the way that it's always been done, that everybody does it the easy way. I refuse to do the obvious thing and the way it's always been done. And I don't know what I'm going to do yet. And that's where the creativity will come in. But that refusal creates a gap, a hiatus, that allows us to be creative, so we don't just follow these same patterns of this is the way we've always done it, and this idea of path dependency, where you end up doing things for years because you don't know why, but it's just that's what we've always done. And there's a phrase that sort of helps me when I'm thinking about independent thinking and how we operate and our marketing and our books, and it's this idea of you do things no one does, or do things everyone does, but in a way no one does. So that's at the heart of independent thinking. If we just wanted to be a training company, we could be a training company, but why would you want to be just another training company or another publishing company? So how are we working in a way that is unlike anybody else, or so do things no one does, or we're doing things everyone does, but just do it in a way that nobody does? And that's at the heart of it, really.
It's really interesting what you said there, and you've certainly enlightened me this evening about the whole refusal. And it's just making me reflect there. I'm thinking, have I ever stamped that out in children? Because that word is so strong, and yet we need to encourage it, as you said, in order to create that independent and creative thinking. So we have to encourage them to feel kind of confident enough to go away from mainstream, away from, what's been done. As you said, it's always been done, so therefore we must continue doing it. So you touched upon philosophy for children as well, and I agree with you. I highly recommend that. It's a fantastic way of getting children talking and thinking. What would you recommend to teachers? What would you suggest to teachers about how to encourage that independent thinking?
I think there's a number of things. I mean, in terms of my take on philosophy for children, there's only 2 thinking skills programs that the research shows actually do make a difference, and it isn't the de Bono stuff, although I'm happy with playing with those sorts of things. But in terms of the research where you can replicate it, one of them is something that was around for a while but sort of fell off the radar, but I know teachers used to love it at the time, the cognitive acceleration through science education, CASE it was called. AD and Shea coming out of King's College in London, and it's powerful stuff, and it's been proven to help develop children's thinking. And then the other one is the philosophy for children, the P4C, and the Education Endowment Foundation in this country have invested quite a bit of money exploring how P4C works and the benefits that it has. And one of the benefits is that it is more heightened in children from poorer backgrounds. And the other benefit of P4C, so they're developing the thinking skills, but it has benefits then within the core curriculum subject areas as well. And also, this is research prior to the EEF stuff from Scotland from a while back, and they found that children who did P4C at primary school, even if they stopped doing it when they got to secondary school, the benefits in terms of their academic achievement carried on into secondary school. So, but it can be quite a slow process getting into it. And I was involved in a project in Northamptonshire years ago, right when I first started, to try and bring P4C into schools across Northamptonshire. And I worked in every single school, college, Prue, everywhere in Northampton that would have me. And one of the things that I did going in to do some P4C with kids, I'd have an hour with year 9 or half an hour with year 1 or whatever. And I used to think, okay, well, I've got two choices. I can spend all night planning and preparing and finding resources and photocopying and going in with all of that, or I can not do that. And not spending all night planning and preparing was a good idea, I think. It's something we call lazy teaching in a good way. And this idea, I don't know where this idea came from, but what came into my head, ultimately what came into my practice was the idea of what ended up being called thunks, which are these little questions that get children thinking quickly and easily, without any preamble, without any resources, apart from just having the thunk in your head and just sort of seeing where it goes. And I can't remember where the name came from or when their genesis was, but it was over that period of a few years working in schools in Northamptonshire. And then the little book of thunks that I wrote, that was one of my early books. But this, I mean, we do it as a tin now, a tin of thunks. So you're picking a card, and the teachers are using this now as a starting point. You can have one per desk, or you can just put it up on the board when you come in. Is it okay to bully a bully? Is a pregnant woman 2 people? That still messes with my head. If you read it but don't pay for it, is it stealing? Does a mirror stop working in the dark? They're questions that they seem quite simple, but there are no rights or wrongs. The answer can be yes or no, or yes and no, or neither, or something else altogether. And that process of not closing in on an answer, it messes with your head. And I hear children saying in these sessions, or when they're dealing with a thunk, oh, my brain hurts, but they're not really complaining. There's a pleasure to be had in that mental gymnastics that you're going through, where you think you've got an answer, then somebody says something else, and you have to sort of go in a different direction, and you never get the gestalt, you never get the end. And the children who suffer most with the thunks, with those sorts of questions, who are the ones at the end go, well, what is the answer then, sir? They're the ones who are usually, in my experience, are the ones who are the most academic. They're so used to having the answer, getting the answer, playing the game of guess what's in the teacher's head, knowing the answers in the back of the book. So when suddenly there aren't any answers, the rug is pulled from under them, but in a positive way, in a way that it should be. You know, Piaget said intelligence is what you use when you don't know what to do. So what are these children doing who suddenly can't get the answer when they're so used to being quickly able to get the answer? And what it does, it leads into a world of complexity as well. It's one of the reasons that I like working this way, where there aren't answers. You've got wicked problems. I mean, Brexit is a wicked problem. The pandemic is a wicked problem. Climate change is a wicked problem, where you do something over here and that messes something over there up. And so you can't ever say, yes, that's it, that's the answer, that's what we must do. It's always some sort of compromise that leads to something else happening that you couldn't quite expect. And then the other benefit, another benefit I've noticed from the thunks is in terms of the self-esteem, that you get children who would never normally speak, or the teachers are observing these sessions, saying that, well, this child never normally speaks when observing my session, or in their own experience they feedback. Yeah. But when we're working in this way, when there are no rights or wrongs, they're the ones who say the most. And you think, well, how many children are not joining in for fear of getting it wrong? Yeah. And as soon as there's a place for right or wrong and knowing stuff and facts and all that, but that's okay. But over here, there's this. It's just the thinking. It's the mental gymnastics. It's the cognitive processes by which we start to explore and argue and discuss and debate and theorize and practice and try this and try that and look for real examples, and then play with the thought experiments like Einstein used to do, another great scientist used to do, where what if this and what if that, and you practice these models, and all of that's going on. And then you're developing oracy as well. That's another one of the benefits of working this way, when they start talking about these things. And just from a simple, thunk like, does a mirror stop working in the dark? And you can lead into science, you can lead into ethics. Is it right to bully a bully? You can discuss those sorts of things. Does a dog mind what you stroke it with? You can look at consciousness. There's all sorts of things that you can, but in a really simple, non-competitive, no rights or wrongs, you can't fail sort of way. And that's a simple way. And I know as well, over lockdown, we did a blog about thunks being used during lockdown. I put sort of 23 ones up or something on the website. Independentthinking.com is the website. If you go to resources,
right. That was my next question.
We're in the process of changing this resource around, so all the videos and all the blogs and things are all cross-referenceable. And there is a section, if you click on the thunks button, you see everything related to thunks. But I know schools were using it during lockdown. I've done thunks online with schools, using it in Zoom ways, and that works. I know parents were using it as well. And there's one of our associates, Mark Creasy, who's a primary school teacher, wrote a blog on how they use thunks to get themselves through lockdown. And what he found, and some of the other associates who are working in primary schools with children in a creative way that encourages independent thinking, independent working, that gets them more sort of problem-based, that uses philosophical questioning, is that the children were just better able to cope with the chaos of the first lockdown compared to the children who everything was done for and done to. And then when the chaos happened, they just had less ability to be able to think for themselves. So for me, the independent thinking and thinking for yourselves and dealing with uncertainty and complexity is just, if we're teaching kids that there's a certainty in the world, that the answer's in the back of the book, we're doing them a disservice, because there are no answers in the back of the book most of the time, and there's no book a lot of the time.
So would you say then on that, I mean, I could listen to you all evening, to be honest, because I remember doing thunks in my own classroom, and they were often the lessons I enjoyed the most, because like you said, you suddenly see these children just kind of flourish and just blossom, because there isn't a right and wrong, and they've got an opinion and they've worked through that, as you said, that mental kind of gymnastics. Would you say then another kind of product of the independent thinking is resilience then? Because just listening to you talk there, you were saying about how, well, actually, if they're independent thinkers and they understand that there's no right or wrong, that they're able to deal with the chaos better. That says to me that perhaps they're a bit more resilient to difficult situations, perhaps.
I think there's an element of that, and certainly the schools where we have associates who are using thunks and using, like I say, problem-based learning, more independent learning, just allowing children to make their own mistakes, to work in a more collaborative way. The feedback that I've got from those associates is that they feel that their children were more resilient and coped better with it. Jonathan Lear, who wrote the book, the Guerrilla Teaching and the Monkey Proof Box, is a primary deputy in a city school in Sheffield, and there's a genuine fit where when asked about what should your going back curriculum be after lockdown, his view really was that if you have to change your curriculum, you had their own curriculum to begin with. So he hasn't had to have much in the way of changes to the curriculum, because that's what they were doing anyway, getting kids to think for themselves and be resilient and be resourceful and be collaborative and work in the real world and deal with challenge and change and all of those sorts of things. So I think there's an opportunity for all educators to review the curriculum and the nature of it. During 1 week in May, we did 22 different webinars called What Now Week, we called it, and it was me having conversations a bit like this, but with the associates and others. And I had a conversation with Jazz Amplifar there, who's a fantastic speaker, whose her childhood was awful, terrible. And she talked about being a chaos navigator. And she felt, in this conversation, she was saying that she felt, it's the chaos navigators, the children from the terrible background, the ones who, just to get themselves to school in the morning is a mark of just how resilient they really are, let alone then when they get told off for not wearing a blazer or not having a pen, or not having done the homework. She feels the chaos navigators, that's their life, that's what they do. So that's uncertainty and threat and anxiety and danger and what's going to happen next. they're ready for that. So they're the ones who have dealt most. So I'm thinking about this word navigation, and yeah, there's a big focus on knowledge-rich curriculum, but I think a navigation-rich curriculum is important as well, where we do throw children at the deep end and see what happens, and sink or swim in a positive and a supportive way.
Yes, yeah.
We do the Piaget thing. Intelligence is what you do when you don't know what you use when you don't know what to do. We'd stop making it so easy and planning everything for them and having all the resources out for them and making everything organised and predictable and certain, because we do them a disservice. The other thing with regard to resilience, and I wrote a book, I put together this book. It's a thick book, The Working Class. It's a collaborative book. We were trying to change this. Another thing I'm trying to do with independent thinking is work within where education overlaps with society and with well-being and with the arts and with the environment and with inclusion, to make sure that we're in those, if you think of that as a Venn diagram, that we're covering all of those circles and the overlaps with education. And one of them was this idea around trying to change the narrative that we've seen again just in the last few weeks around children, the government's refusal to pay an extra little bit for children to be fed over the holiday. And you see this narrative about, well, it's about the feckless poor and it's their own fault. Well, if the parents can afford cigarettes and Sky TV, then they can afford to pay their children. And it's always more complicated than that. And this idea there's always another way. That's one of our sort of leitmotifs within independent thinking. We're not saying it's like this. We're saying sometimes it's like this, sometimes it's like this. There's always another way. So with this book, The Working Class, what I wanted to do was try and change those sorts of narratives. And the narrative around it's a level playing field. All kids are the same, and as long as they go to school, and if we give them the same opportunities in school, then the ones who are good will rise to the top, and the ones who don't, well, they deserve it. But we know it's not a level playing field. Neurologically, sociologically, we know that food that the parents have before conception has an impact on the neurological development of the brain in the womb. And we know that pollution has an effect on thinking, and there's all those sorts of things. So we tried to put as much as possible into that book, and so many different stories. And some of there are universities, there are academics represented there are associates who had working class backgrounds represented there. There's all sorts of people in this book as we try and change that narrative. And the idea about resilience is okay, yes, let's help children be resilient. That's not a bad thing to have, but one is, let's not ignore the fact that some of these children are incredibly resilient just to get to school anyway, and let's not think that we can teach them how to be even better at what they do when we just tell them off because they haven't got a pen. And the other thing is teaching children about resilience, but let's help them, and society as a whole, challenge the reasons why they have to be resilient in the first place. You're poor and you're living in chaos, so we need to teach you to deal with it, as opposed to, how about if you weren't so poor, and if there wasn't so much chaos, and if there was more support and there was more help, so there was less need for you to be resilient in the first place. So it's quite easy to flag up resilience as yes, we need to teach them that, without actually trying to address the issues that underlie why their lives.
Yeah, I mean, you've really got me thinking, and I've often thought about some of the lessons I've done, and I'm making a generalisation here, but often when I did lessons to do with, say, applying maths with money and money problems, I often found it was those very children who had to unpick that problem were the ones that, as you said, getting to school was mammoth for them. They're getting themselves up and getting themselves changed. So unpicking a maths problem was easier in comparison. And it always fascinated me that those children really surprised me at how they were able to, and yet you give them something quite simple, and sometimes, as you said, with the right and wrong, and they often found that harder. And you've given me so much food for thought. I probably won't sleep tonight.
The thing about cognitive load, a lot of people talk about cognitive load. We have to think about that. It's become part of the educational neuroscience, and what we need to take on board in the classroom. So you have your dual processing. You can't sort of show them one thing and say something else. That overloads their cognitive loads. You need to show them and say the same thing, and all of those things are fine. But then in that process, and we look at Barrett Rosenshine's principles of instruction, but there doesn't seem to be any it's the learning robot thing. It's assuming that everybody walks in and is sort of ready to go. But what about the cognitive load just to survive, just to just to get by, just to make sure their younger child is fed or had breakfast or is clothed or cleaned or has got to school, and all that cognitive load before they even walk through the door. So if we're going to take cognitive load as part of the teacher's toolkit, we need to have the bigger picture than just cognitive load is something we think about from 8:30 till 3. We need to have a better understanding of it.
Brilliant. Well, you've given us so many nuggets of food for thought and ideas, and I can't thank you enough, Ian. So just remind us, if we want to find out more about your organisation.
Independentthinking.com or .co.uk. All the associates there, we've got I think about 50 odd different associates covering all sorts of different aspects of education. So if you're looking for a Zoom for staff insight, I was with Jackie Beer all morning. She was speaking to about 90 primary teachers across 10 different schools in Essex. So we're doing the Zoom stuff, but we're also doing physical stuff where we can, the keynotes and the resources. So independentthinkingpress.com are all our books. If you're an MQT, there's a deal going on at the moment. You get 30% off all the independent thinking, independent thinking press books. If there are books outside of that deal, use ITL20 as the code at checkout, and you get 20% off the independent thinking press books and free post packing, free P&P. So on the website you can see the associates, you can see the topics that we cover, but also now with this new resources thing, because we're doing more and more videos. Some of them are free, some of them are not very much, but are paid for. So we're recording bits and pieces and we put it all online, as well as the blogs that we've done as well. So we're trying to make as much stuff accessible as possible, and make a living from it, and do our bit to make sure education is done. It's more than just the data and the grades and the Ofsted and all that. There's a far bigger picture in education that we can be involved in, all of us in education, that we should and need to be involved in at this time.
Thank you for watching. I hope you found it enjoyable and useful. In the comment box below, please put a question or a comment about the video. To grow our community more and help other teachers out there, please subscribe to the channel and share our posts and videos. Thank you.